No organization can be psychologically safe without a focus on the most important resource in the organization, the human resources. Stay tuned for a conversation with a human resource professional with lived experience that fuels her passion for helping others. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Well, welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. In 2020, there are approximately 718,120 human resource workers in the United States. Despite the decrease in 2021, the number of HR workers in the U.S. is predicted to increase to over 840,000 in 2025. While I've never been a full-time practitioner myself, I pursued and completed a master's degree in human resource management in 2004, supervised a number of HR professionals over the years, and I've come to understand the difference between those who see people as cogs in the system and people who see these as humans, see workers as humans in a social setting called work, who both contribute to the system and need to be supported by that very same system. I met my next guest as the Human Resource Director for the City of Richmond, Virginia Police Department. At the time, her and her now husband and I served in the Richmond Fire and Emergency Services Department. I found Antionette Tull to be a principled, caring, and supportive HR professional that has a vision for how HR should work in the modern age. She's since formed her own consulting practice, Hurtle, LLC, which focuses on facilitation, HR business, and career coaching. It's my pleasure to welcome Antoinette Tull. How are you, Antoinette?
I am well. I'm well. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. It's good catching up. It's good catching up. It's been a couple of years, and we've had a couple of opportunities to talk. But this is we're going to take our time today, or at least up to an hour, whichever comes first, to talk a little bit about the connection between human resources, psychological health and safety, and any other topics that come up as we get into the conversation. So I tend to start, as I have figured out in doing these podcasts. I do these kind of introductions of folks, but we can find out as much about our guest from our guest as me just kind of babbling on. So who is Antoinette?
That question is always so funny to me because I'm just a sum of so many things. I mean, we all are a sum of so many things. But I mean, personally, I'm a nurturing, supportive wife, mother, daughter, granddaughter, and in that order, and I bring those people and that spirit with me everywhere I go, which is important when we're talking about psych health and safety in the workplace. But professionally, I'm a certified HR professional. I have over 20 years of experience in human resources. It was primarily focused in public safety, but I'm the founder and CEO of Hurtle LLC. And like you said, it's a consulting firm. My goal is to provide HR support and services to public safety and the areas of career coaching, HR business coaching, and training facilitation, because there are unique challenges in public safety that we have tried to cover over the years with bravado and with ignoring. And so once I understood that, I understood that there was just a different level of support, of HR support, and a different understanding of operations that needed to be provided for a public safety organization.
Sure. Sure. Wow. That just that realization in and of itself is a thing. It's a
It
thing
is.
because as you all know, folks in public safety tend to be very traditional and very into their routines, and unfortunately, some of those routines aren't as effective and even as healthy for the people as they probably could be. Which brings us to the connection between what you've been doing for the last number of years and the topic of the day. So when I mention, or if I mention psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you when you hear those words?
So one, it took me a while, and I want to make sure that I'm completely transparent because throughout the year, sometimes you don't know the type of environment you're in until you pause and take a look at, what is happening with you in terms of how you're engaging with people. I found myself, a few years in feeling a bit more irritable, a bit more frustrated. And so I had to really start taking a look at my, like psychologically, how I don't want to turn into a police officer. And that is what I continue to say, because I did not, that wasn't my career choice. I was choosing, or actually I was voluntold. That's a whole nother story of how I got to the police department. But I was choosing to be in the environment and be supportive. But I did not want to shut down and be suspicious. And those are just some of the attributes that happen when you're in law enforcement. You begin to look at things. You end up seeing the worst of people every day. And so I couldn't do that. I could not see the worst in people every day and be an equitable HR professional. And so I began to just make sure that, when I got off work, I rebalanced my psych health. But what it means to me, David, is really being able to go into any environment, personally and professionally, and feel free to engage as a sum total of myself. I'm accepted for who I am and my expertise that I bring to the table. I'm able to learn and develop from where I am, and I'm free to ask and make mistakes so that I can safely be, psychologically feel as if I, am a part of that thing, whatever that thing is. I'm able to contribute my ideas fully, and I'm able to challenge, those ideas without fear of retribution. A lot of what I ended up understanding about my role in RPD is that I needed to challenge things that I just saw that were a part of that old traditionalism. And being a woman, being an African American, we're in the South, and being that one HR person at the table where they had not been, they weren't used to having an HR person at the table. So my perspective was always different. But I had to just overcome those things and try to overcome the environment to make myself better, and knew that it was essentially for a better goal. I kept saying, because I was voluntold to go there, then that the reason I was there was much higher and much larger than me. And I believe that in my faith, of course, helped me more psychologically safe. But at the end of the day, psychologically safe means I'm going to feel, or anyone is going to feel, that they're accepted where they are, that they're able to learn and develop and grow where they are, that they are able to contribute wholly without fears of making a mistake, and being able to challenge those ideas without retribution. That, to me, that's the sum total of feeling psychologically healthy and safety in any space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you've nailed it. I mean, there's no question that you understand what this concept is. So share a little bit. We're having the conversation before you came on that, both you being a practitioner, me kind of being around HR folks for a number of years. I've personally seen some challenges, and I attribute a lot of the challenges to what you talked about, the fact that HR professionals go into an environment and honestly become the environment, sometimes even unaware that it's like a form of Stockholm syndrome. You've become like your captor, so to speak. That you start to use the language, and but unfortunately you also end up with the same kinds of trauma and such, and it starts to show up when you interact with other people. And it also shows up in the policies, how they're written, how they're executed. So talk a little bit about what effective HR professionals and HR systems, what should they look like? I mean, that's kind of a broad question, but what really should they look like, not just in public safety, but what should they look like in your view?
That is really broad. That's a really broad question. But I would say one, they should look like good sound. What do I want to say? The system should always result in the outcome that is best for everyone in the organization or best for the organization. You're gonna always, we know public safety, you're gonna always have those who are like, I don't like anything, and I don't like myself either. That's always a part of our culture. We know that those individuals are there. But I really do believe one of the things that I did see is that, HR is not at the table in a lot of spaces, especially in public safety. Most of the jurisdictions and organizations, there's a centralized HR that actually kind of goes out and treats public safety very broadly, right? And so you're going to have that anti-harassment policy, you're going to have that training, but guess what? It's going to be geared to all of the agencies in that particular, jurisdiction or area, and not necessarily the needs of the agency. And so creating any good system means that you actually understand the operations, you actually understand the tactics. Whenever I'm facilitating with jurisdictions now, I always explain to them, I can go straight to, certain policies and know that, a part of what I do is diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So I can go to policies and see where you have not considered all of your employees, primarily the ones who have been underrepresented over time. And like we said earlier, public safety's been around a long time and it's built in that traditionalism. Right now, it's a matter of breaking down that traditionalism and ensuring that everybody in there is safe. I think if you look at the system, I'm trying to make sure that I capture this succinctly. If you look at the system and determine what your outcome should be, it could be a disciplinary system. It could be, a lot of organizations, they just, arbitrarily hand out disciplinary action. Well, you need a disciplinary system, and that system is going to include a strategy that has development and corrective action. It's going to have remedial support in there. It's going to have sometimes psychological support. Those types of things matter. And right now we're only capturing the action, but we're not capturing, the thoughts and the intent of the action. Good HR ensures that all of that is in there. Does that make sense? Good HR is going to look at the total system and tell you where you may lose your human capital because there's too much ambiguity in the policy. There's not enough transparency there. We can lose people, if there's an uncertainty, and how they're going to be handled in the workspace. So good HR, at the end of the day, needs to be at the table day one, discussing what policies need to be had and the strategies so they can ensure that all of the human capital is pretty much safe through every step of the procedure. And that the outcome is going to be an outcome that, one, is great for the organization, but also does allow dignity and respect for their employees, but keeps everyone, in the same consistent place.
So
answer, but I do believe it.
That's quite okay. I mean, there are a lot of circumstances where people try to give really short answers to complex questions, which is another reason why the issue doesn't really get addressed, because they try to make it simpler than it really is. You make me, as you're talking about, particularly your experience in law enforcement and in the public sector in general, it causes me to think about the reaction that I get from folks in the private sector when I share that I've been in the public sector most of my career, and they think, you public sector people don't really know what's going on. The reality is, I think we know better. Well, not that better. I think we know more in public sector employment than a lot of private sector people understand, because there aren't as many boundaries on what we do. the police department, the fire department, the public works department, the whatever, they do virtually any and everything. And it doesn't matter whether you're a customer or not, whether you're passing through. Just so you could find yourself anywhere at any time. So talk about just a little bit for those folks who might think, is there a difference between your approach with a public sector or private sector employer? Are the issues similar?
Human beings are human beings. What I tend to agree with you in terms of the slight difference with public safety, simply because there's so many rules that the private sector doesn't have. There are so many rules in the public sector that govern how firefighters and police officers are to behave. And there's a lot of accountability. But one of the things that I'm always trying to balance when I'm watching the news or talking with individuals about, officer conduct is there are rules there, accountability, that's the key. The rules are there. What I find in the public sector also is that there are grievance processes and things that are etched in stone in regards to how you handle individuals. EAPs are pretty much, more government jurisdictional. I think 2020 shed a lot for private sector, because in the private sector, of course, there weren't many mechanisms for mental health. It was a part of the benefits plan, but they also had better perks, and that, flexible work environment, the remote work, before remote work became popular in 2020. We saw companies being able to flip, because we've been doing this the whole time. And then they have a lot of more benefits, in support of their employees. But people are people, and they are going to challenge us, and they are going to help us grow. But I don't see that there are huge differences in how HR will operate in either sector. I've luckily been successful in both, but people are people, and how leadership governs accountability and decide what's important. Is the widget important, or is the person important? That's the question. What's important? Is it the widget, or is it the person? Because that's where my focus is going to be. Is it that bottom line, or is it, ensuring everybody is safe physically and psychologically in order for us to get to the best bottom line we can? So those are questions that really have to come from the top. But I don't see, as far as I'm concerned, in HR, where there's a huge difference in how things should be handled or administered. They're just different safety mechanisms in place in each place.
Sure. Wow. There, over the last couple of years, I've been doing some research on psychosocial hazards and the fact that in the United States, we basically act like that the hazard doesn't exist. We talk a lot about all the other hazards, again, biological, chemical, ergonomic, safety, physical hazards, and psychosocial hazards kind of get left out. But interestingly, even in the occupational safety and health environment, when we talk about hazards, we tend to focus on, a lot of the physical things and what the safety manager is going to do and what the leaders are going to do. But when psychosocial hazards and psychological safety come up, we actually tend to turn towards the HR folks, because a lot of the issues are what people would perceive to be HR related. And so what kind of conversation is going on in HR circles about psychological safety these days?
So 2020, of course, has expanded everybody's knowledge of psychosafety. It's funny that you say that, because I used to tell my leaders, just because a person did it doesn't mean that it's an HR issue. Doesn't mean it's an HR issue. We have guidelines on behavior in the department. So let's make sure that we're going to those and understanding how to handle it. But it's talking to people, and in HR now that, 2020 put HR at the forefront. It wasn't just COVID, that was the first one. And then here comes social justice smack dab in the middle of COVID. And now we're trying to balance out, do we think about the widget, or do we think about the person? Has our bottom line been more important than, the individuals that we are asking to handle this type of work. In public safety, it's like, wait, have we been taking care of our community? And one of the key things I learned from one of my chief chiefs, I still call him one of the best chiefs ever, Chief Rodney D. Monroe. Is if you take care of your people will take care of you and the community. I've never forgotten that. I'm never going to forget that. And so I think HR is now moving along. Before we were compliant. Are you complying with Title VII? Are you complying with FMLA? Are you complying with ADA? The Fair Labor Standards Act. Are you complying with it? OSHA? Are you complying with it? So physical things, right? And now it's like, wait, we really have to think about how these environments are affecting people. How, this 5-day work week, does that give us the best? Telling people they have to come into the office. Well, if I have 5,000 things going home that don't require my full focus, and I'm willing to take, 10 hours to work from home and be able to handle those things, but give you the product that you need and my deliverable on time when you need it, right? Why should I have to go into the office? And so HR is now asking those real questions, because for me, I'm always about, is that, do we need this? Is this an essential function? Help me connect this to the essential function of the job. And that's where I go with everything, and in the department, we went from, no beards and no tattoos. And I remember having the argument about the tattoos, and I'm like, help me understand. And I think at the time we were like number 3 in the United States for like tattoo salons, like the number of tattoo salons. Like, we have one on every corner. Help me understand. If you want me to recruit and have a class of 30, help me understand how someone's tattoo is going to, not help them effectuate in the rest. That those types of things don't make sense to me. And so when it comes to someone walking into the building and having tattoos, you shouldn't feel any kind of way. We shouldn't question whether or not you can do, your job. I do have one quick story. When I had just started in the organization, maybe a couple of years in, maybe a year or two, but I had a pencil skirt. And I don't know if you know what a pencil skirt is, but it's just a slim fitting skirt. It was long, like below my knees. And someone, came in my office and said, I don't know if that skirt, is appropriate for the workplace. It's distracting to people. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand. And so there were so many things going through my mind, right? Because, those types of microaggressions in the workplace, because I'm like, it's below my knees. Like, what are we talking about? I'm not, it's too fitted. And, we have to really balance out microaggressions in the work. And when it comes to HR, when it comes to leadership, I don't think we always have a level of accountability in our policies that ensures people understand that even these types of things over time can become harassment. It did not happen to me, and I continued to wear my skirt after I had some conversations, with a few people, because that just, I didn't address that person head on. They were a leader and way higher than me. But I continued to wear that skirt. But it made me question a lot of things until I got to the place where I'm like, why am I still questioning what I'm wearing in the morning before I leave? Like that in itself creates a barrier. And organizations we have to flip our script now and ask, like, how does this affect this person? If I'm questioning something, it shouldn't even be questioned. How is this going to affect this person's ability to focus on their work? And ability to give me what I need, when they get here. And that's what, those little small microaggressions are about. And I think they permeate our system, our environment, and our employment more than anything else. There's always, those comments that come every day. And I've seen where over time they turn over time into something that, one time I witnessed it become an assault, because the person was just so tired of having to deal with, that type of microaggression. And it matters. It matters. If I say I don't want to talk about my age, my hair, my dress, and how is it helping, how is it not allowing us to meet our goal, or how is it, how is that a part of my essential function? It's not. It doesn't even impact. So that's I get all excited. So you gotta shut me up. But I get all excited about this.
No, I am listening with bated breath because honestly, it's just refreshing for someone who has an HR title to talk like you talk. I have to be honest.
Thank
because,
you.
It's just very refreshing because, as I said before, so many, and my wife and I have this conversation often. She has same thing, has her, some of her training in HR as well, though neither of us, we're kind of admirers of HR people.
Well, thank you. We don't have many. So
yeah, and we're admirers of good ones though, because we've both had these, and we're not the only people who have had these experiences, again, of folks, they went into the HR role, but because they were treated so poorly, they were traumatized and experienced so many microaggressions and exposure to so many psychosocial hazards themselves, they're not able to help other people. They're not able to sit down and have a conversation about something that's going on at home, a domestic violence situation, or whatever, you pick it, because it triggers them, because they've got so much built inside them, and the organization itself isn't supporting them. It isn't supporting them. So how are they going to go to these other employees who are having all kinds of stuff going on? And when I was with the city of Seattle, my job in the fire department, I was the assistant chief of safety and employee services. It's all the people stuff, HR, safety, you name it, training. And we had everything going on. I mean, I don't want to air all their dirty laundry, but there's everything, you name it. We had people getting divorced. We had inappropriate relationships in the workplace. We had people who were convicted of crimes. We had all kinds of stuff going on. But guess what? It's the human condition. And not all of what was going on with them was simply them. A lot of it, we created the environment. We exposed them to all kinds of stuff. We, didn't pay them properly, all that type of thing. So the system was more, I think, contributory to who these people were. But in bringing up your story, I wanted to have you just chat a little bit more about your experience. What caused you to think you needed to have your own company and not necessarily be in that environment yourself?
So I started, can I go back real quick to how I got there? Because I was told. I say this at my facilitations. I start out saying this, I did not like police at all. Like, I was happily working in social services, being in support of people who I felt needed my support, and I loved support, right? And my HR director came to me and was like, hey, what do you think about going to police? And I was like, I don't. That is where HR goes to die. Because in the police department at that time, 5 people had gotten either reassigned, transferred, fired, but they were gone within a matter of like 3 years that I had been there working in social services. So I didn't want to go. And when I arrived, that the attitude of, HR, they didn't even have a sufficient office for me, like sufficient space. The office I thought I was going into had actually gone to someone who was sworn, who was going to be overseeing HR. And I wasn't the chief at the time. I was the HR consultant. And I literally was like, I don't want to stay here. But my personal work ethic, I don't want to fail. And so I got there and everything they needed me to do. Well, I did. The first week was a bit rough because they didn't give me the office, a computer, a phone, but they gave me a stack of work for operators, 911 operators. And I actually took that to my old office and did the work and brought it back. But the assistant chief at the time called me and was like, I heard you're not coming to work. What's going on? And I'm like, y'all haven't given me the proper tools and resources to do my job. Can't come back until you do that. And so, long story short, they got it done and got it for me. But for her, because I did the work and she saw that work ethic in me, there was more, you know how public safety goes, like this person is okay, ta-da. So we're going to treat this person a little bit kinder than we did the others. And I felt that because there were a lot of introductions made after that. But I still didn't feel safe. I still didn't feel safe there. And I ended up leaving. But then, of course, interviewing with Monroe, the opportunity, what he saw was an opportunity to create HR as a function directly under him. And when he did that, it just, you know, all of the things that I saw that were concerning, I could actually bring it to him or anyone on our staff to say, hey, you know, let's take a look at this. Or I was a part of the strategy. And that matters a lot. A lot of HR people are not a part of the strategy.
Right.
I've had people come, I've had, you know, different chiefs come, even some of my clients, like, I want you to do this. And I'm like, that's contrary to where the world is going. And that's more authoritarian. It's not inclusive. And so once I realized all of the successes that we had just by creating policies, a lot of, it's just a little plug, a lot of the places that I work with now, their concern is inclusion, and their concern is that their staff are all white males, you know, and that's been the history of public safety. And what I say to them, I was like, listen, this is 2022, it's prime opportunity to prepare your environment for the people that you want to come in. Whoever is underrepresented, understand who they are in your community, prepare your environment with inclusive policies, equitable policies. You're in a really good space to prepare it before you bring people in. And now you're working on a retention issue because your environment is not safe enough to remain, and they're going to go somewhere else that they decide, you know, it's going to be more psychologically safe for them. So I said a whole lot, but that's my answer, you know, in terms of what can HR do? We're at the table, we're in the mix, you know, but we're there at the strategy. It's not just telling HR what they need to do. It is really saying, this is the challenge. This is the outcome that we want to see. And then being open enough to hear their contributions, but also open enough to understand that HR policies, that practices are out there that the HR professional can bring to the table if they're safe enough, you know, to challenge the organization.
Right. Yeah. You said a mouthful there, and it sounds like my observation is that people in public safety tend to treat everything like it's an emergency. And they don't call till after the robberies occurred or after the fire started or after that. What about the preventative stuff? And I think that's what I hear you talking about is, well, let's have a policy and a strategy and a procedure in place before we have that problem, before we lose people, before we have to take corrective action, before, rather than all of the fire drill that goes on after something bad happens. And HR, you got to have a meeting with the chief and come on down, and so is going on. Well, that was predictable. Yeah. That was absolutely predictable.
So many people thought that they were like, oh, you work, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And I was like, I never saw an 8 to 5 day. I worked 24/7, 365. My time off was very, very short. And it didn't happen. And it did create issues, over time, because this is my second marriage. And I was just like, I am living the public safety life. This cannot happen again, but that the environment again, it can create that. But, personally, we all have to figure out what we need in order to feel supported.
Yes.
In the workspace. One of the reasons, when the question was, why did you start Hurtle? And that's it. I saw all of those things and I started it. But moreover, there's so many people. I've been speaking nationally since 2016, on HR and mismanagement, what it looks like, right? And so for me to go and speak in these jurisdictions, I would then have individuals calling for help and support. And I'm like, wait, I still have a full-time job.
Right.
Still have a full-time job. But I am only interested now in helping people, remaining psychologically safe and healthy myself, because there were dips in there, while I was working for the department, but also helping other people understand that no, this is actual life, balancing it out. It is not always a crisis. The fire is the crisis. The homicide is a crisis. An employment issue or microaggression, those things can be stopped right then with dignified, respectful conversation.
Mm.
And they won't grow,
Mm.
but we just got to start removing it, because as humans, we all want connectivity. We all want to be respected. We all want to, maintain our dignity and do good work. And we can do that as long as we're all treating one another like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier how, and again, I've heard this before. Again, my view is that the pandemic in many didn't really change a lot. People say it didn't really. It didn't change much, but it exposed a lot. That's the way I look at it. Because these issues were here well before COVID-19 showed up in the country. The issues around people being able to work remotely, they could have done that years ago. Like you just didn't want to, basically. These conversations around dignity and respect in the workplace and diversity, they've been going on since the founding of the country. So they really aren't new. I guess I'd love to say they are, but they really aren't. But now in this, this era that we're in, where people are focusing, both workers and leaders are focusing more on mental and emotional health. Again, what's your thought? You're an HR professional, but at what point, how do you help folks when, the issue as you assess it, this really is a mental and emotional health issue that requires, and then what? Then where do you go?
So if you have put these things in place, then there's not only, EAP, a lot of public safety, personnel, they don't even like going to EAP because they believe that there's a communication between the two that's going to affect, their work performance, or perspective, their work, how they're perceived in the workplace. But making sure that you have a variety of resources. Resources are key. A lot of times in the department, we had a peer support group. So maybe if it's, our first blush at an issue, like there's an argument that may have turned physical, we may not necessarily send you to EAP, but we may have the peer support, gather around you. One of my biggest proponents for anyone going into public safety or any public safety department is have a mentorship program that's real, that's accountable, and that balances out not just your newbies, but also creates that fresh perspective for individuals who've been there and tenured and may have just gotten into this psychological toxic, behavior simply because of the environment, or because, of course, you're seeing the worst of the people every day. So putting those types of mechanisms in place to give people support and connectivity, if individuals, and I say, if individuals are bringing you real solutions, at one point, we had yoga, we had Pilates, all of those things, stress reduction programs that are there and available and normalized, and when I think about so many things in life, these are just things that are not normalized. That OSHA form, the first report, that's normal. It's normal in the work behavior, and so when we see that someone is just, having, they're agitated, they're more frustrated, the behavior, their performance, their demeanor with either, our citizens or with their supervisors and peers, when we see those things, we should be able to have we should have a reporting mechanism in which to say, hey, you know what? Did you remember we have these stress reduction programs? There's yoga, there's, like I said, Pilates, there's meditation, like having those different types of resources there. If we know that they're having financial difficulties, that happens in public safety a lot. These step programs, that's a whole nother podcast. But the inequity in pay, financial education programs, making putting those things out there consistently for people to take part in, parenting programs and coaching. I remember one time I was like, you know what, we really need to start looking at pet insurance. And they're like, are you crazy? And I'm like, think about the number of people who really that's their companion. I've met a lot of people, that's their companion. And one of the things that stuck out to me during COVID, David, is that I talked to a person over the phone and they said, I haven't touched another human being in 48 days. And I'm like, I can't imagine what that looks like, because they were in their home. They were getting their groceries delivered. We were all on lockdown and they didn't understand psychologically what that was doing to them and just needing to have that connection. I can't hug my mom. I can't hug my dad, and so having a pet there was one, helpful for them, but then just their perspective of, I don't have a connection to another human being right now. That's hard. And there are people like that every day, not just because of COVID.
Right.
There are people who leave work, they have these real quick engagements, and they're not, if you're in law enforcement, those engagements probably all not positive. The majority of them are not. And what happens? You go home and we all have a sense of belonging. What is it? It's the third level in Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
As human beings, we all have the need to belong and feel loved and intimacy, or even just connected. And so we gotta, in our workspaces, we have to be mindful that when people go home, what does that look like for them? And so if they're going home to loneliness and they're coming into the environment and it's like everything is negative and their engagement and the supervisors, what does that do to an individual, and how are you actually supporting the total person, the total employee? And we're a capitalistic, society. So how does that get you the results that you need and want?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just wow. So share a little bit about, so I've always been a safety person. I realized that when I got about halfway through my fire service career and realized I was really more of a safety person than I was a firefighter. The going in the building's on fire, once you've done it once, it's about the same thing. But so share a little bit about at least your perception and your experience of the connection between the HR folks and the occupational health and safety people. What's the connection there, and should there be one?
Well, I definitely think that there should be one. So I had a safety officer reporting to me. I was in charge of risk management. Again, the focus really is on the physical aspects of the job. When what I found is that for a long time, those things didn't even come out, in terms of how employees, felt, after the incident or during the incident. And so I definitely believe that there should be more reporting mechanisms for psychological safety. It starts with, again, a well-being strategy, though. So if the organization has a well-being strategy, then we know that if someone is physically harmed in the organization, which is where we go with risk management, then there should be an emotional or mental health component to that, because there's so many times where that particular physical injury could have did come from something else that was psychologically there. And we don't capture that information. We tend to, like you said, ignore it or act like it doesn't matter. I had an instance, and it wasn't a physical safety, but I had to show a leader, they were my boss, one of my team liked to yell. That was just what he did. But he was yelling, and in his yelling at me, I had to remain calm. But I said, if I take this information to my captain and lieutenant the way you delivered it to me, then that's going to frustrate them and it's going to make them angry. I said, and if they take that to the officer goes out, whether it's a polygraph examiner, whether it's a recruiter, and they're engaging and front facing with that citizen, and it goes bad, it's not a good engagement, they're gonna get, they're gonna have the same kind of yelling and heat and fire to that citizen. And then the citizen gets to complain. That officer gets written up courtesy, and we never knew that it stemmed from the manner in which we treated that in the entire chain of command.
Right.
Like, we don't follow those types of behaviors. And I do think an astute HR professional will understand that, when there's discipline in place, you want to follow. I follow, I will follow things like, wait a minute, did this happen because this engagement over here happened? Because it gives you a much better perspective of what the issue is. It's not just physical. They didn't just hit someone. They didn't just, wreck the car. That didn't just happen. Something else was going on with that individual,
Right.
Physiologically. And we need to pay attention and ask those questions when we're doing intake, for in risk management. That's just my take. But I do think safety officers must also, they have to have, I won't say education, I would say awareness, not necessarily education, but awareness of how the psychological instances, microaggressions and things of that nature impact employees, and know when to also recommend, some type of additional assistance, EAP, some type of stress reduction program, like I said, whatever the issue is that employee is presenting or willing to discuss. I'll say that also should be addressed. I'm going to address this. I might have to get you remedial training for the accident, right? But you've also said you're currently going through a divorce. You've also said, that, and we tend to forget that. Like, we let the employee talk. And I'm like, wait. Did we not hear that? Did we not hear the stress that they're under because they're having a child custody battle that's gone on for 2 years? Like, wow. What's the support mechanism for that?
Right.
So they could bring their whole self to work,
right.
And feel supported. And we just tend to stay away from that. And I'm like, why would we stay away from it when it's hindering their ability to work?
Yes. And our staying away from it tends to come up later when those situations go really bad. You just made me think, just a quick story myself. This was back in my Seattle days. We had a firefighter paramedic who was in a custody battle. And I don't recall how long it was going on, but it didn't go well at all. And the paramedic lost custody of his kids and was so emotionally devastated by the loss of his children that he took some of the equipment that the city had provided for him. He was a tactical medic, took one of the ropes that we had provided for him from the city and went to the school where his kids went to school and committed suicide. And when we were doing the investigation, it came up that, well, yeah, we knew he had a problem, but nobody really wanted to intervene before something like that happened. And I'll never forget that story because it's an example. And then what happens is after the tragedy of that nature, and as you well know, one of the leading causes of deaths to public safety folks right now is suicide.
Yeah.
Because they're emotionally so broken by what they've seen in their own lives, compounded by what they see in everyone else's day after day after day after day of, again, some of the worst circumstances you could ever see. And then they go to the organization. The organization says, well, you were late for work today.
Yeah.
Or something, you didn't turn that report in. Or, really? Seriously? I got really serious things. And we're having a conversation about that. And it's, so again, when I listen to you, I go like, why wasn't Antoinette the HR professional that was dealing with that thing back? Because, and again, I want to give people grace. I think it's because they really, in some cases, weren't in touch with their own issues.
Yeah.
They weren't.
That right there is key. And so whenever I am in spaces and I'm invited to jurisdictions, especially if I have to talk to staff, I start off with how public safety came about. And it was the bravado. It's the traditionalism that has been rooted. Nobody talks about feelings. What? Well, I mean, we used to have a thing like, on the chief suite, nobody cries on the fifth floor. Like, we don't cry up here. What are you talking about? Right. And so it was a joke, but it keeps people unsafe.
Right.
Because if something happens and it is a situation that is sad or frustrating, or if you're like me and I'm angry, I'm crying, if it's that situation, I can't be my full self here, but there are so many stories that break my heart like that, and I didn't always win because it's hard to be the person at the table about the bravado. Like it's hard to sit and tell people about that. It's hard when I walk into some clients and I know they're not really ready, but you have to remain steadfast because we know that this is the proper way to handle our human capital.
Right.
Because all we're doing when we're ignoring it is ignoring a part of the individual that we're claiming to be a part of our family. We're claiming, we're devaluing them every time we don't do that. And
Sure.
so that is something that we have to break down in public safety, that traditionalism that says, be brave and have courage. Well, courage is me having this conversation with you that I'm not my best self today. My wife left last night. I don't know when I'm going to see my kids. I'm not going to be able to focus and normalize us being able to say, oh, okay, hold on. These are the things we have in place that's going to be able to help you, and get that person through that situation. But we just like, oh, okay, so you can still work today, right? That frustrates me so much. They're like, you can still work today. No, they can't.
Right.
They can't work today. But they're not going to tell you that they can't work today because they also don't want to lose their job. So those types of things, they have just been, a part of public safety for a long time. But we have to really, I always say public safety has been in an identity crisis since at least 2012, right? Someone can argue and say forever. But at least 2012, we know that we've been talking about this, right? And it's not just public safety, but now it's the world. We saw a lot of changes in 2016, 2020 threw us for a loop. So it's now our opportunity to be like, you know what? Let's be the transformative generation. Let's be the generation that transforms it into a way that is going to be, fruitful, productive, comforting, supportive, not just of the community, but for ourselves, because it goes back to what Monroe said. Take care of your people. Then they will take care of your community. And, all you're doing is showing up, when the one person or two people get out of line, you're showing up to protect and serve in that way. But if you really take care of your community, they're going to take care of you. Right. And we'll be all better for it,
So in our last few minutes, I have a couple more topics, but very short ones. The first one is, so share a little bit about, in your experience, particularly since you've, launched your company, what have you seen in terms of some areas that you got a lot of hope? It looks good. It lets you know things are getting better. You saw an example someplace that, somebody's getting this. So share one of those if you could.
So when I go back to well-being strategies, one of the jurisdictions that I work, they created a very robust well-being strategy. So they are trying to normalize well-being in the workplace. That from morning workouts to weekend workouts to employee resource groups, public safety tended and government tended to stay away from employee resource groups. But they're like, no, we're not going to stay away from it because we absolutely need people to connect at work and outside of work to make sure that there's support there. And so they had a list and everyone had access to it, because accessibility is also the thing. But everyone had access to it. And so they normalize being able to have they have these morning calls, and they normalize being able to discuss not just physical challenges that they've had with OSHA, those types of things in organization, but also psychologically, like, hey, they have a IO psychologist. And so they're like, these are the trends that are happening in the department. And these are the resources. Like, they're pushing out the resources. Read it, go to these places, but they're pushing out the information versus saying, oh, it's on the website. Oh, it's on the internet. Oh, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to discuss it. You can sit around the table every morning. You can sit around the table every morning and have your, your conference for the day. But when you're actually having that conference and then you're pushing out the information as if it's normal. And it's all about, their well-being strategy is normalizing bringing your full self to work. So whatever concern you have, whatever issues you're going through, we have support for that. And I thought that was so unique in public safety. They weren't a very large agency. So, they had less than like 300 people, but they were able, they weren't large, but they were able to recognize, I'm going to shoot this information out. A long time ago, I talked about nap rooms, and there's a crisis room. After a call, there's a really, there are some calls that are really brutal. You have an opportunity, and they don't call it a nap room. It's escaping me what they call it. But you can actually go into this room, mark off, go here, settle your mind. Settle your mind. You can listen to meditation music, but just rebalance yourself and process what just happened so that you can, go to the next call or decide, hey, I can't.
Right.
I can't, I can't. I need to, go home. It's going to take much longer than this. So jurisdictions are, really now trying to come up with ways to be in support of their employees. That was just one that I just saw, and I'm like, y'all are really taking it seriously.
Wow.
And I'm glad they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so as we close this conversation, because I really could take another couple hours, but I'm sure you have business to get to and other folks to help. So if folks want to get a hold of you and get help from you, how can they do that? And what do you see as next for you and for your company?
Well, next, I do have things to do, but that's packing, because I'm going to be in Las Vegas as of Sunday at the, I think it's the 10th annual Recruitment and Retention Summit that's in Las Vegas at the Bellagio. So I'll be there. But www.hurtlellc.com is where they can reach me. I'm on LinkedIn under Antionette Tull. I'm also on Instagram. I have to be on Instagram. It's Antoinette NHR, all one word, and as well as Facebook. I try to post as much as possible on those 3 platforms. But I'll be in Las Vegas talking about, I'll be at the Recruitment and Retention Summit. But what's interesting is that my topic is called Creating Opportunities from Closed Doors. Because in public safety, we tend to forget the individuals who were not promoted. We tend to forget individuals who are in those assignments for months and years, doing the same repetitive things, seeing the same repetitive worst case scenarios, and not doing anything about it. And so how do we create opportunities for them where they are in those spaces? So it's a joy. It's a joy. It's one of my favorite presentations, so I can't wait to get out there. But that's how you can reach me.
Right on. Right on. Well, thank you so much. I've just enjoyed just sitting and listening. It makes me think of that over the years when we were kind of working in the same jurisdiction, we'd have these interactions, but I never got to sit down and just talk about, your views. Some of it showed up in what you did. So I could tell you can tell when people are different. You can tell because they make these comments that they are kind of questioning things, and they're going like, well, why, how come we can't do that? They seem to have this, this kind of openness. So I picked up on that. And And there's this dude that you know and I know, and we tend to like some of the same people. So that tells me you're a good person to begin with. So, but again, thanks so much for taking some time out to chat with us about what it should look like. Some of the experiences that you've had, and I'm hoping that people are going to sit here and listen and go like, well, hey, we need to do something like that, because what we have really isn't working. Because HR does have a very, very important role in the psychological health and safety of folks in their organization. So again, just thanks so much. Give my best to your husband.
I shall.
Yes, and the next time our paths cross, we'll have to catch up and finish the conversation.
Definitely.
Thank you. So thanks for dropping in and listening in on this conversation with Antionette Tull from Hurtle LLC. We look forward to great things from her. And again, you can follow us on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast at our website, psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can reach out to me at ID2 Solutions. I'm on the net through my website, through LinkedIn as well. And we're out there. We're available. Reach out to us. We'd love to continue the conversation if you're so interested. And please do catch up with us next time on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.